Hi, I'm Laura Janda, and this is Endresen, and we want to talk to you about two networks of constructions and how they are related to each other. And so we're going to look at two types of evaluative constructions. They are known as the assessment and attitude networks in our Constructicon. And basically, these are two very similar types of constructions because they are both evaluations. One is about an evaluation of an item external to the speaker, and the other one is about how a person feels about something. And as you can already see, there is a degree of overlap between these two groups of constructions, and that's part of what we're going to explore here. So assessment would be something like "Cartina tak себе," that painting is so-so, as opposed to attitude, which is really like "Меня хватит," I'm really sick of this. I'm fed up. Okay. So, this construction, "Нашли развлечение," which is literally just "found X." This expresses both attitude and assessment, since we have both an assessment of what somebody is doing and also how we feel about it. And important to note in this construction is what the filler words do here. So this is inherently a negative assessment, but the filler word might not be necessarily be negative, but it's but the construction expresses something negative regardless. So, for example, "Dura" is an idiot, and so "Нашли duru," there we're, do you take me for a fool? So that's already a negative word. But "krasotka" is actually a positive word. It is, however, coerced into being negative in this example, "Нашел красотку." But "место" is absolutely a neutral word. So a neutral word also gets coerced into being negative. Okay, but one of the most important things that we want to tell you in this presentation is that the Constructicon is not just a pile of constructions, but rather it's a very systematically structured item. And we get this idea from work that has been done previously, especially by Adele Goldberg and Charles Fillmore, who said that language is a structured inventory of constructions. Adele Goldberg made this nice observation of the English subject auxiliary inversion family of constructions, showing that we have a prototype of a non-prototypical sentence, and then we have specific types of constructions that are related to this. And what we've done here is we tried to take this idea from Goldberg and Fillmore and show it on a grand scale, on the scale of a large number of constructions in a language, that really a language is a constructicon. And in so doing, we are looking at the relationships among constructions, and we find hierarchical relationships and also lateral ones. The hierarchical ones are, we find three levels here: families, clusters, and networks. So families are the smallest groupings of constructions. They're usually 2 to 9 constructions. And here we see that the constructions themselves are very nearly synonymous. Some members may also share similar syntactic structure and anchor words. Clusters are groupings of families, and clusters can also be grouped together in such that they display a radial category structure within a network where one cluster is more prototypical, and then it's joined by other clusters that form the largest type of grouping as a network. And a network is defined by the fact that all of the constructions in that network share a single general semantic tag, such as assessment or attitude. Those are examples of general tags. And notice that there are also these lateral relationships, which we're going to look at a little bit afterwards. So it's both hierarchical and also sort of, so both vertical and horizontal. Our data comes from the Russian Constructicon. You're going to see a lot more about that otherwise today, so I won't go into that. And just I want to mention that the methodology was not something entirely idiosyncratic, but rather was carried out by a whole group of people in order to minimize subjectivity. So here's a graph now of the 20 largest general semantic tags, if you will. So these are 20 networks of constructions. And the two that we will be looking at are assessment and attitude. So on the left are the general semantic tags, and on the right, you see the numbers of constructions in each of those networks. And because the assessment and attitude constructions overlap in 58 constructions that express both assessment and attitude, altogether, assessment and attitude constitute 388 items, or 18% of the entire database. And that makes this group actually larger than even that very largest group, which is the intensity constructions. So then here is an overview of the general semantic tags, so that you can see that they also have some semantic organization here, and the assessment and attitude ones are semantic types that are within the class of subjectivity. And very important in this group is polarity values, which we're going to talk about a little bit more on the next slide. So in terms of polarity, some constructions signify something that's clearly a positive assessment, as in if we say, "Professor, он был ничего," he was pretty okay as a professor. Or it can be clearly negative assessment, as we saw in Картина так себе. And some constructions can express either of the two values, and this depends upon what kind of filler they have in their slots. So we have, for example, на редкость with the positive, like на редкость умный, it's something positive. With ленивый is something negative. It's negative. So we have we see that attitude constructions are also characterized by polarity values in a very similar way. So once again, if we have the не вопрос construction, this is always a positive attitude, willingness to do something. Мне не да is a negative attitude. This is a lack of willingness to do something. As opposed to this как я X, что, in this construction, it can really depend upon what the adjective we have in the filler slot there. So как я рад, I'm really happy that you came back. Как я зол is I'm really angry about something. At this point, we might ask the question, what is more frequent, positive, negative, or neutral polarity of such constructions? Nina Davidovna Arutyunova hypothesized that there should be more and more diverse linguistic means employed for encoding negative evaluation, and this is something that we can now test out looking at our data set. And so on this figure, you see the distribution of data, which supports Arutyunova's hypothesis. We find that both networks are indeed biased toward negative evaluations, which are visualized here by the dark blue bars. And the attitude network, in fact, is even more strongly skewed in the negative direction. More specifically, we observed that overall, almost twice as many constructions encode negative assessment as opposed to positive assessment. And the relative proportion of constructions encoding negative attitude is even higher than that of negative assessment constructions. And the difference in positive value rates is not that dramatic. But the yellow bars show that the smaller subsets of constructions that encode either negative or positive or negative value, these depend on fillers such as negation and broader context. So we can explore why the distribution is so skewed towards negative polarity by looking at the families of constructions that we identified based on the combinations of their semantic and syntactic properties. And here Anya is going to take over and tell you more about the internal structure of these two networks.
Okay, so assessment and attitude constructions form two large and partially overlapping networks. We model these networks as two radial categories, each centered around a local prototype. Large boxes like this visualize clusters of constructions, and smaller boxes represent families. Dashed lines between boxes connect clusters and families that are related conceptually, and solid lines indicate overlaps between the groups when they involve some of the same individual constructions. Numbers in parentheses are type frequencies for each family and cluster. The network of assessment constructions comprises 4 clusters formed by 25 families, and the network of attitude constructions contains 4 clusters as well, formed by 18 families. If we look at the left part of this diagram, we can see that assessment has several dimensions. One distinction that is very relevant for our data is general versus specific assessment. General assessment is an overall assessment that evaluates an object holistically, approaching it as a whole. General assessment is conceptually the most basic and prototypical type of assessment. It's a distinct cluster of 26 constructions that contain evaluative lexemes that denote good or bad. This cluster is most intensively connected with all other clusters, which is a further indication of its prototypicality. 3 remaining clusters represent specific assessment and evaluate an object from one of possible perspectives, focusing on a single property of an object, like physical qualities or usefulness of an object. We distinguish between assessment in relation to norms, expectations, assessment specific to people. These are 2 most prominent clusters in terms of type frequency, and assessment in relation to quantification. Assessment related to knowledge is a distinct type encoded by a family of 6 constructions that does not belong to any of the 4 large clusters, and we represent it as a separate structural unit. General assessment is represented by 3 families. Each of them is compatible with both positive and negative polarity. First family is assessment of an entity, where the constructions mostly have predicative expressions as anchors, like ничего такой, так себе, не очень. Constructions of the second family encode assessment of an activity and have an anchor that functions as an adverbial modifier. For example, на славу, ничего, так себе. The third family consists of constructions that assess an entire preposition and represent bicausal syntactic structures with metrics predicates in the main clause, like счастье, что. Его счастье, что их задержали, he was lucky that his flight was delayed. Apart from families that belong to a single cluster, several families belong to more than one cluster at the same time. We call them transitional and represent by boxes placed outside the clusters. These families are connected by lines to those clusters where they belong. Let us take a close look at 3 families that can be best understood as belonging to both general assessment cluster and assessment in relation to norms and expectations. These constructions express general assessment, but also refer to the concepts of the norm, the standard, and the expectations associated with them. In this sense, they can be analyzed as reference point constructions, and when evaluating, speakers tend to compare the evaluated object to their idealized cognitive model, which functions as a standard. One such family is matching the norm and includes 3 constructions with anchor words that refer to norms and standards, как надо, как следует, что надо. All 3 constructions express positive evaluation motivated by the semantics of fitting into the expected and proper performance. The family not matching the norm encodes negative evaluation. These constructions formally resemble general holistic positive evaluation, but in fact mean the opposite. Хороший ученый Хороший ученый means the opposite of a good scholar. Most constructions of this type are exclamatory clausal statements that assign a name to an object that does not deserve this name. The third family contains confirmation requests that seek to establish whether an object responds to the normal representative of a category X. Syntactically, such constructions are rhetorical questions, like «Разве не красота? Isn't it a beauty?» Formally, the speaker is questioning whether the object matches the norm, but the assumption behind these questions is that the object clearly does so, and this yields positive polarity. Transitional families like this prove the point of the radial category model, where it's allowed to have multiple overlaps and the lack of rigid categorical distinctions between the established groups of data. If we count all constructions that belong to more than one unit of this network, we can estimate the degree of overlap between the four clusters, and this yields 71 construction, or 32% of the data set. And we observe two types of relationships among constructions: hierarchical relationships realized by families, clusters, and networks, and horizontal relationships formed through transitional constructions with multiple motivations and through near synonymy of constructions and families. And we find the same types of relationships in the network of attitude constructions. Here we have four clusters: as acceptance, emotional attitude, dissatisfaction, and mental attitude, formed by 18 families. The family capacity preferences does not belong to any of these clusters. The acceptance cluster is the most prototypical. It is conceptually the most general one, and it provides also motivation links to all other remaining clusters. Constructions of this cluster convey the meaning that the speaker more or less accepts a situation, for example, willingness or unwillingness to perform an action. The dissatisfaction cluster is the most numerous, but it's kind of negated version of acceptance. Only 12 constructions, 5% of this data set belong to more than one unit in this network, showing that the amount of overlap between the families is much smaller here than in the assessment network. The largest group of attitude constructions express various kinds of dissatisfaction. All constructions of this cluster carry negative evaluation and constitute four distinct families that form a rising scale of negativity, from discontent to disapproval, swearing, and curse. The discontent family share the semantics of relatively mild dissatisfaction on the part of the speaker towards the situation. Many constructions in this family contain anchor words that denote shortage or enough. Только дождя не хватало. Rain is the last thing I needed. The disapproval family comprises 43 constructions that encode both the speaker's strong negative attitude and negative assessment of someone's behavior. This group of constructions is the home of the construction found X, Нашли, развлечение, and is a large zone of overlap connecting the two networks. Swearing is a family of 11 constructions that mark even more negative attitude of the speaker towards the situation. Swearing constructions contain anchor swear words like черт, demon, and its derivatives, какого черта, чертов начальник. Curse constructions denote the highest degree of negative attitude. They do not necessarily contain swear words, but always carry the intention of harming someone or something. We find strong horizontal relationships across the two networks, which is not surprising. Overall, the overlap of the two networks amounts to 58 constructions, which is 26% of each network. The largest portion of this overlap is disapproval family that simultaneously belongs to the assessment network and contains the found X construction. Negative evaluation of someone's behavior mostly supports negative attitude to such behavior. Also, both networks contain a family of 12 constructions with interjections, where the noun phrase conveys the assessment and the interjection expresses emotional attitude of the speaker. Фу, какая гадость. Yuck, what a disgusting thing. And finally, the three constructions simultaneously belong to capacity intellect family of assessment and capacity preferences family of attitude. Here we have an example that illustrates that depending on the filler of the noun phrase slot, the semantics can shift towards assessment or attitude. If the referent is the speaker, as in я с техникой на вы, I'm not friends with technical equipment, the construction conveys the attitude to a certain type of activity. And if the referent is another participant, as in все женщины с техникой на вы, all women are unable to deal with technical equipment, the construction rather encodes assessment of their abilities to deal with a certain object. And finally, here the dashed line indicates conceptual closeness of constructions referring to emotions. Summing up, we have presented the first study of a large number of constructions that serve the function of evaluation. Assessment and attitude constructions form two large networks that partially overlap, and we model these networks as radial categories. This study gives detailed, concrete evidence of the internal structure of a constructicon, as we detail in describing hierarchical and horizontal relationships across families, clusters, and networks. Thank you for your attention.